Hello, Ron. Would you tell us what your organization does in working with the homeless, mentally ill?
Turning Point Community Programs, which is an organization that provides services for adults with psychiatric disabilities. We have a program here in Stanislaus County called the Empowerment Center. It had a longer name than that years ago. It was the Consumer and Family Employment Empowerment Center. That's why we now call it the Empowerment Center, to shorten the name. But at any rate, the name of that Empowerment Center represents not just a drop-in center, it's much more than that. So folks may come to the Empowerment Center who have self-identified with some information that supports that they have a serious mental illness. They may come for a variety of reasons, whether they just want to socialize and watch television, whether they want to participate in a computer lab, do some of the trainings that we do for pre-employment training and resume writing, attend some of the support groups that we have. I think as I left there just before I came here today, there was a support group for post-traumatic stress disorder. So we have folks with that diagnosis who benefit from attending that group. So we have a mixture of staff, probably 100% of them consumers, that are running that program and staffed in that program, helping individuals that may come from board and care, may come from room and board, may come from families' homes, or may come from the street, who just left the mission this morning. We're getting services there at the Empowerment Service and Empowerment Program, and taking part in a variety of those services that I just mentioned.
Do you provide services for homeless people who are mentally ill? And also, could you walk us through a situation recently or in the past that you helped a person get shelter, a home of their own, so to speak?
Sure. The first question about do we provide those services? One of the things we do that we have the fortune of doing is that we're part of the continuum of care for Stanislaus County. So we're one of several organizations that's a grantee with HUD funding, where it's marked for individuals with a psychiatric disability and for folks who are homeless, and particularly chronically homeless. And by that I mean have had 1 year of being homeless, being out in the street, living in someplace not fit for human habitat, or they've had at least 4 episodes of that in the last 3 years. That tends to be more of our focus, would be the latter, because they have a greater need. There's a higher acuity there, more chronicity. So yes, we do. We've got grants, and we master lease apartments with property management so that we could sublet to individuals who have been identified meeting criteria for homelessness or chronic homelessness. And we become sort of a temporary landlord and help secure an agreement. So yes, we have funding streams that allow us to do that, and then our target is to find individuals who have been identified with a mental illness, a psychiatric disability, and who are either homeless, but in particular, chronically homeless. There was an individual who we had met at the Empowerment Center, excuse me, so that's not an uncommon referral for us, the program that I spoke of earlier, because a lot of the individuals who use that program are coming out of the mission and into the Empowerment Center. So this is somebody who had been identified by the staff of thinking that he may benefit from perhaps talking to somebody on our housing staff that help coordinate services through those HUD grants that I mentioned. And so we'll set up an appointment, and he comes and he meets with Geneva or Jessica or Randy. In this case, I think it was Geneva. And so, they're looking for 3 things in particular. Because those are federal funds, there's certain criteria that comes with that. We want to make sure that we've got some documented evidence that there's a disability that's been identified, there's been a diagnosis made, that there's evidence that there's this chronic homelessness, that it exists, with dates and times, or an agency that can verify that, and one's income or absence of income, whether they're on SSI or they're getting food stamps or whatever the case may be, because that's required of us. So we go through that process. And given that we've got somebody who meets that criteria, we have that evidence, our mission is to move forward. How do we find what apartments are available that we have still for lease and line them up? Because if they meet that criteria, our task is to get them off of the street or get them out from behind a building where they might be sleeping, and get them into an apartment that's clean, that's decent and affordable, that they darn well deserve, as opposed to fighting the elements out at the weather and deciding where's a safe place to lay your head at night. Instead, they get to stay in a nice, decent apartment, and hopefully it's permanent housing for them. That's the goal. And we go through this routinely. We help somebody secure an apartment. I think it was last week. They got their keys and now in a nice apartment here in this community and out of the street. And today we're seeing somebody, very similar story, whose background meets the criteria for chronic homelessness. And soon I hope that they land in an apartment that we've got picked out that's it's sweet. I mean, they deserve that. So that's our goal. About 4 years ago, I started shifting about my focus isn't so much that, it's really about what's inside me and how do I become more subordinate? How do I serve more personally and professionally? So it was just a personal mission. But when I started changing that, you know, when you're getting folks off the street who may not trust, or the lady I was just talking to, that's how I'm late, because the lady goes, where do I get help? She's got PTSD and it hasn't been diagnosed. She just spent 10 years in prison. And now she's out for I don't know how many years, and she was spooked about being in the building because she's sizing up the environment. But I'm sitting there. To me, it's a privilege. It really is to be able to sit here and listen to her calmly and hear her out. And while I'm listening to her, decide how do I plug her in. Here's a support group for PTSD. Eventually, we might be able to talk to her about housing. But to me, that's a blessing each day to find out so many people who don't get to lay their head down on pillows like we do, and do that work. When I retire, that's what I'm going to be doing, is looking at how do I write grants for homeless in particular. And that's what my focus would be. Yep, undoubtedly. And to help people coming out of prisons. I had a story with a guy, I could go into it, but I'm telling you, there's some good people coming out of prison that don't meet the profile of, oh, here's another antisocial, hide your wallet. I mean, there's some good people that got in some bad situations.